I'm a trauma physician at Riverside Memorial Medical Center in Portland, Oregon, or at least I was until I submitted my resignation 8 months ago. You can call me Dr. Elena Vasquez if you want, though most people in the emergency department just called me the paramedic doc. During my 19 years there, I've responded to thousands of emergency calls, overdoses, cardiac arrests, vehicular accidents, and every kind of trauma the human body can endure. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one call that made me question everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the boundaries between them, and ultimately led me to leave emergency medicine entirely. Riverside Memorial is a level 1 trauma center serving the greater Portland metropolitan area and the surrounding Columbia River Gorge communities. It's a comprehensive facility with one of the busiest emergency departments in the Pacific Northwest, handling everything from routine medical emergencies to the most complex multi-trauma cases in the region. During my time there, I worked both as an attending physician in the ER and maintained my paramedic certification, often riding along on the most critical calls when additional medical expertise was needed in the field. The facility sits on the east bank of the Willamette River, a sprawling complex of interconnected buildings that has grown organically over the past century. Our trauma bay handles an average of 15 major cases per day, with helicopters landing on our rooftop helipad every few hours, bringing in the most critical patients from across Oregon and southern Washington. I had seen everything you could imagine during my nearly 2 decades there: construction accidents from the city's ongoing development boom, recreational accidents from the countless hikers and climbers who flock to the Cascade Mountains, and the unfortunately common results of Portland's increasingly dangerous traffic patterns. I chose emergency medicine because I thrived on the unpredictability and the immediate life or death decision-making that the field demands. Unlike other medical specialties where you have time to research, consult, and carefully plan treatment approaches, emergency medicine requires you to make critical decisions with incomplete information under extreme time pressure. I was good at it too. My colleagues respected my clinical judgment, and I had developed a reputation for staying calm and effective in even the most chaotic situations. But nothing in my medical training or professional experience had prepared me for what I would encounter on the night of October 15, 2023. The case I'm about to tell you about began with a routine radio dispatch at 11:47 p.m. on a cold, rainy Sunday night in October. I was working a double shift, covering for a colleague who had called in sick, and I was already 13 hours into what would become a 20-hour day. Portland in October is notorious for its unpredictable weather, and that night was particularly treacherous. A steady cold rain that had been falling since early evening, creating slick road conditions throughout the metro area. Our paramedic unit received the call just as I was finishing up paperwork from a previous case: multi-vehicle accident, Interstate 84, eastbound near the Wood Village exit, multiple vehicles involved, possible entrapment, request immediate ALS response, and medical helicopter standby. My partner that night was James Chen, a veteran paramedic with 22 years of experience, who had seen everything the job could throw at him. James and I had worked together for nearly 6 years, and we had developed the kind of professional shorthand that allows emergency responders to function effectively under pressure. When the call came in, James looked at me and simply said, "Bad night for this," referring to the weather conditions that would make both the accident scene and any potential helicopter transport significantly more dangerous. During the 18-minute drive through the dark, rain-soaked streets to reach the accident scene, we discussed what we might expect to find. Multi-vehicle accidents on I-84 during rainy conditions typically involved several cars sliding into each other due to the slick pavement, usually resulting in moderate injuries, but rarely anything life-threatening. The mention of possible entrapment suggested that at least one vehicle had sustained significant damage, but even that didn't necessarily indicate critical injuries. The accident had occurred in the eastbound lanes of Interstate 84, just past the Wood Village exit, where the highway curves through a section of dense forest. It's a stretch of road that's particularly dangerous during wet weather, because the curve comes at the bottom of a long downhill grade, and drivers often don't reduce their speed enough to compensate for the reduced traction. When we arrived on scene at 12:23 a.m., the devastation was immediately apparent, and far worse than we had anticipated. What we found was not a typical multi-vehicle slide-off, but rather a complex accident involving 5 vehicles that had created a devastating chain reaction of collisions. The sequence of events, as reconstructed later by accident investigators, began when a large commercial truck carrying automotive parts lost control on the wet pavement during the curve. The truck jackknifed across both eastbound lanes, creating an immediate obstacle that the following vehicles had no time to avoid. The first car to encounter the truck was a Honda Accord, driven by 31-year-old Sophia Restrepo, a veterinary technician who had been driving home to Gresham after working a late shift at an emergency animal clinic in downtown Portland. Sophia's Accord struck the trailer of the jackknifed truck at approximately 55 miles per hour. The impact caused her vehicle to ricochet off the trailer and spin across the median into the westbound lanes, where it was immediately struck by an oncoming SUV driven by a family returning from a weekend camping trip in the Columbia River Gorge. The SUV's impact sent Sophia's car spinning back across the median, where it was struck a third time by another eastbound vehicle that had been unable to stop in time. By the time the chain reaction had ended, 5 vehicles were involved, scattered across both directions of the interstate, in a scene of twisted metal and shattered glass that stretched for nearly 200 yards. The truck driver suffered moderate injuries and was conscious and responsive when we arrived. The family in the SUV had sustained various injuries, but were all conscious and talking. The other drivers involved had minor injuries consistent with typical vehicle accidents, but Sophia Restrepo's Honda Accord had been destroyed in a way I had never seen in nearly 2 decades of emergency response work. When I first approached Sophia's vehicle, I expected to find a fatality. The Honda had been compressed to roughly 60% of its original size, with the engine compartment pushed back into what had been the passenger compartment, the roof crushed down to the level of the dashboard, and the entire driver's side of the vehicle caved in from the multiple impacts. The car looked like it had been processed through an industrial compactor. The extrication process took the Portland Fire Bureau's technical rescue team nearly 75 minutes with hydraulic rescue tools, pneumatic spreaders, and cutting equipment. They had to essentially disassemble the vehicle piece by piece to create an opening large enough to reach the driver's compartment. Throughout the entire process, we maintained communication with whoever might be inside the vehicle, calling out repeatedly, but receiving no response. When we finally gained access to the interior of the vehicle, what I found challenged everything I thought I knew about trauma medicine and human physiology. Sophia Restrepo was not only alive, she was conscious, alert, and trying to apologize to the rescue workers for causing so much trouble. "I'm so sorry," she said, as I made my first visual contact with her. "I hope I didn't hurt anyone else. Is everyone okay?" Her vital signs were medically impossible, given the obvious severity of her injuries. The steering column had been driven back through her chest. Her left arm was clearly fractured in multiple places and was trapped beneath twisted metal, and there was obvious evidence of massive internal trauma from the crushing force of the multiple impacts. Yet her blood pressure was 118/76, her heart rate was 88 beats per minute, with a regular rhythm, and her breathing, while somewhat labored due to the mechanical compression of her chest cavity, was adequate for proper oxygenation. Her pupils were equal and reactive to light, indicating no apparent head trauma, and she was oriented to person, place, and time. As we worked to stabilize Sophia for extrication and transport, the impossibility of her condition became even more apparent. I had been working trauma medicine for 19 years, and I had never encountered a patient who remained conscious and coherent with this level of crushing injury and apparent internal damage. The mechanism of injury alone should have been fatal. She had been struck by vehicles traveling at highway speeds from 3 different directions, resulting in forces that should have caused immediate cardiovascular collapse, traumatic brain injury, and death. The visible damage to her vehicle indicated that she had sustained blunt force trauma equivalent to falling from a 10-story building while being compressed in a hydraulic press. But Sophia was not only conscious, she was concerned about others and trying to participate in her own care. "How bad is it?" she asked me as I established IV access in her right arm, the only limb that remained untrapped and appeared to have sustained minimal injury. "I have surgery scheduled for my cat tomorrow morning. She's getting spayed, and I promised the owners I'd be there." I found myself in the surreal position of having a casual conversation about veterinary procedures with a patient who, by all medical logic, should have died on impact 90 minutes earlier. While we were still working to extract Sophia from the wreckage, her family began arriving at the scene. Her younger brother Miguel had been contacted by the Oregon State Police and had driven from his home in southeast Portland. Her parents Carmen and Eduardo made the drive from their home in Beaverton, and her boyfriend Alex rushed from his apartment in the Pearl District. The sight of Sophia conscious and talking gave her family immediate hope and relief. From their perspective, if she was awake and speaking, that meant she was going to survive. They couldn't see the extent of her injuries from their position behind the accident scene perimeter, and the fact that she was engaging in normal conversation suggested to them that her injuries weren't life-threatening. Miguel was able to get close enough to the vehicle to talk to his sister while the extraction process continued. I watched as he held her free hand and listened to her asking about their parents' health, reminding him to feed her cat, and expressing concern about missing work the next day. "Don't let them put me under general anesthesia if they don't have to," she told him. "You know how sick it makes me, and make sure someone calls Dr. Harrison at the clinic to let him know I might be late tomorrow." What disturbed me most was her complete lack of awareness about the severity of her condition. She seemed to have no pain, no distress about being trapped in a destroyed vehicle, and no understanding that she was experiencing injuries that should have been immediately fatal. It was as if her consciousness existed in a protective bubble, completely disconnected from the physical trauma her body had endured. When the fire department finally completed the extrication at 2:15 a.m., nearly 2 hours after our arrival on scene, we were able to get our first complete assessment of Sophia's injuries. What I saw defied not just medical explanation, but seemed to challenge the basic laws of physics and human anatomy. The steering column had penetrated her chest cavity and was pressing against her heart and left lung, yet somehow without puncturing either organ. Her left leg appeared to be fractured in at least 3 places and was positioned at angles that should have indicated complete separation of the limb, yet she maintained circulation and sensation throughout the extremity. Her pelvis showed obvious signs of crushing injury, yet she maintained bladder and bowel control and showed no signs of internal bleeding that should have accompanied such trauma. Most impossibly, despite injuries that should have caused immediate exsanguination and death, she had lost virtually no blood. The vehicle interior, her clothing, and the rescue equipment showed minimal blood staining, despite the fact that her injuries should have resulted in massive hemorrhaging. During the transport to Riverside Memorial, Sophia remained conscious and conversational. She asked about the other people involved in the accident, worried about the cost of having her car towed, and even made jokes about how she must look terrible for any photos that might end up in the news. "I hope this doesn't end up on one of those highway safety commercials," she said, as we navigated through the Portland streets toward the hospital. "My mother would be so embarrassed." Her vital signs remained inexplicably stable throughout the 25-minute transport. Blood pressure steady, heart rate regular, oxygen saturation normal, and neurological function completely intact. I had transported hundreds of trauma patients during my career, and I had never seen anything like what I was witnessing. When we arrived at Riverside Memorial at 2:47 a.m., the trauma team was assembled and ready. Dr. Patricia Kowalski, our chief trauma surgeon, had been briefed on the mechanism of injury and the apparent severity of Sophia's condition, and she had called in the most experienced surgical team available for immediate intervention. But when we wheeled Sophia into Trauma Bay 1, her condition seemed to defy the radio report that had preceded our arrival. She was alert, oriented, and actively participating in the medical team's assessment. She answered questions appropriately, followed commands for the neurological examination, and even asked if she could call her workplace to explain why she wouldn't be in the next day. "I know everyone's probably really worried," she said to Dr. Kowalski. "We're a small clinic, and when someone doesn't show up, it throws off the whole day's schedule." Dr. Kowalski looked at me with an expression I had rarely seen in her 20-year career, a mixture of professional confusion and something approaching disbelief. She had reviewed the photos from the accident scene that had been transmitted by the fire department, and she had expected to receive either a deceased patient or someone in critical condition, requiring immediate life-saving surgery. Instead, she was faced with a patient who appeared to be having a normal conversation while simultaneously displaying injuries that should have been incompatible with consciousness, let alone life. The trauma bay became a controlled flurry of activity as the medical team worked to complete a comprehensive assessment of Sophia's condition. Blood was drawn for a complete laboratory workup. IV lines were established for fluid resuscitation and medication administration, and imaging studies were ordered to evaluate the full extent of her internal injuries. The initial chest X-ray showed what appeared to be the steering column in direct contact with her heart, yet her EKG showed a normal heart rhythm with no signs of cardiac injury. The pelvic X-ray revealed fractures that should have been associated with massive bleeding and hemodynamic instability, yet her blood pressure remained normal, and her laboratory studies showed no evidence of blood loss. When the CT scan results came back, the impossibility of Sophia's condition became even more apparent. The images showed internal injuries that should have resulted in immediate death, a steering column pressing against her heart without puncturing it, multiple rib fractures that somehow hadn't damaged her lungs, and pelvic fractures that had miraculously avoided major blood vessels and organs. Dr. Kowalski called me aside after reviewing the imaging studies. "Elena," she said, "I've been doing trauma surgery for 2 decades, and I've never seen anything like this. According to these scans, she should have died on impact. Hell, she should have died from any one of these injuries individually, let alone all of them combined." As I watched Sophia continue to interact normally with her family members who had been allowed into the trauma bay, I began to realize that we were witnessing something that fundamentally challenged our understanding of human physiology and survival. This wasn't just an unusual case or a medical anomaly. This was something that seemed to exist outside the normal boundaries of what should be possible for the human body to endure. The most disturbing aspect wasn't just that Sophia was alive when she should have been dead. It was the complete disconnect between her physical condition and her mental state. She appeared to exist in a reality where her consciousness was entirely separated from her body's experience of trauma. She felt no pain from injuries that should have been excruciating. She showed no distress about being in a hospital trauma bay, surrounded by medical equipment and concerned family members. She had no awareness that she had just survived what should have been an instantly fatal accident. It was as if her mind had created a protective barrier that prevented her from experiencing the reality of her physical condition, but in a way that went far beyond any psychological defense mechanism I had encountered in my medical career. Dr. Kowalski made the decision to take Sophia into surgery immediately, not because she was showing signs of hemodynamic instability or deteriorating condition, but because the imaging studies indicated injuries that would inevitably become fatal if not addressed surgically. "We need to remove that steering column from her chest cavity," she explained to Sophia's family. Even though she seems stable now, having a foreign object in direct contact with her heart is not sustainable. We also need to repair the fractures and address the internal damage before complications develop. As the surgical team prepared for what would be an extraordinarily complex procedure, Sophia remained calm and conversational. She asked Dr. Kowalski about the expected recovery time, worried about taking extended time off from work, and requested that someone make sure her cat was fed while she was in the hospital. "How long do you think I'll be here?" she asked. "I have vacation time saved up, but I'd rather not use it all on something like this." The surgical team exchanged glances that I recognized from my years of working in emergency medicine. They were the looks that medical professionals share when they encounter something that falls completely outside their training and experience. As I watched the surgical team wheel Sophia toward the operating room at 4:30 a.m., I found myself confronting questions that would ultimately change the trajectory of my medical career. What exactly was keeping Sophia alive when every principle of trauma medicine indicated she should have died hours ago? How could someone sustain such massive physical trauma while maintaining completely normal consciousness and vital signs? Was this some kind of unprecedented physiological response to extreme trauma, or was something else entirely happening? Most disturbing of all, what did Sophia's condition suggest about the nature of consciousness itself and its relationship to physical injury and death? I had always approached emergency medicine from a strictly scientific perspective, relying on evidence-based protocols and established medical principles to guide patient care. But Sophia's case seemed to exist in a realm beyond conventional medical understanding, challenging fundamental assumptions about human physiology and survival. As I completed my documentation of the case and prepared to brief the surgical team on our field observations, I realized that this call was going to be different from the thousands of others I had responded to during my career. This wasn't just going to be another interesting case to discuss at medical conferences or an unusual situation that would make for a good story among colleagues. This was something that would fundamentally alter my understanding of life, death, and the mysteries that exist at the boundary between them. What happened in that operating room over the next 8 hours would prove to be even more disturbing and inexplicable than anything I had witnessed at the accident scene or during transport. But that's where this story takes a turn into territory that still keeps me awake at night, 8 months after I submitted my resignation and walked away from emergency medicine forever. What happened in operating room 3 over the next 6 hours would fundamentally shatter everything I thought I knew about life, death, and human consciousness. Dr. Patricia Kowalski later told me it was the most disturbing surgical procedure of her entire career. When they opened Sophia's chest cavity, expecting to find massive internal bleeding and organ damage, they discovered something that should have been medically impossible. Despite the steering column having penetrated her chest and pressed directly against her heart for over 3 hours, there was virtually no internal bleeding. Her heart continued beating normally throughout the procedure, showing no signs of trauma or damage. More impossibly, when they carefully removed the steering column, her heart tissue showed no puncture wounds, no bruising, and no evidence that a foreign object had been in direct contact with it for hours. It was as if her body had somehow accommodated the intrusion without sustaining damage. Dr. Kowalski described it to me later. "Elena, it was like her organs had rearranged themselves around the foreign object, creating space where space shouldn't exist, protecting vital structures in ways that defy anatomy and physics." The surgical team found the same impossible pattern throughout her body, fractures that showed no signs of bleeding or nerve damage, crushed tissue that maintained perfect circulation, internal organs that had been compressed beyond what should be survivable, yet functioned normally. Most disturbing of all, Sophia remained conscious throughout portions of the surgery. Despite receiving what should have been adequate anesthesia, she occasionally spoke to the surgical team, asking if everything was going well and apologizing for the inconvenience she was causing. As the surgery progressed, something even more unsettling began to emerge. the surgical team started noticing that Sophia's injuries weren't healing, they were simply disappearing. Fractures that had been clearly visible on the preoperative X-rays no longer appeared on the imaging studies taken during the procedure. Damaged tissue began regenerating at a rate that defied medical explanation. Internal bleeding stopped not because of surgical intervention, but because the injuries causing it seemed to be reversing themselves. Dr. Kowalski made the decision to document everything with video recordings, knowing that without visual evidence, no one would believe what they were witnessing. By hour 4 of the surgery, Sophia's body was essentially healing itself faster than the surgical team could repair the damage. We weren't performing surgery, Dr. Kowalski told me afterward. We were witnessing something that exists outside medical science entirely. At 8:30 a.m., while still in the operating room, Sophia became fully conscious and began speaking normally to the surgical team. Despite being under general anesthesia, her conversation was coherent, appropriate, and deeply disturbing. "I know what's happening to me isn't normal," she said, her voice clear, despite the breathing tube that had been placed for the surgery. "I can see myself from above sometimes. I can see all of you working so hard to help me." The anesthesiologist, Dr. Michael Torres, checked his equipment multiple times, confirming that Sophia was receiving medications that should have rendered her completely unconscious. Yet, she continued speaking, describing details of the surgical procedure that she shouldn't have been able to see or understand. "The strange thing is," she continued, "I don't think I was supposed to die in that accident. I keep seeing images of things I still need to do, animals I need to help, people I haven't met yet." Dr. Kowalski asked her directly, "Sophia, do you understand what's happening to your body right now?" "I think I'm in between," she replied, "between being alive and being dead, and something is letting me choose which way to go." What Sophia said next would haunt everyone in that operating room for the rest of their careers. "I can feel myself being pulled towards something peaceful, but I also feel like I have the choice to stay. The problem is, staying like this isn't really living, is it? My body is broken in ways that can't be fixed, even if it looks like it's healing." She paused, and the only sounds in the operating room were the beeping of monitors and the quiet hum of medical equipment. "I think I need to let go now, but I wanted to thank all of you for trying so hard to save me, and I need you to tell my family that I'm okay, that I'm not afraid." At 8:47 a.m., exactly 8 hours after the accident, Sophia's vital signs began to change. Not in the chaotic emergency fashion typical of medical crises, but gradually and peacefully, as if she was simply choosing to stop. Her heart rate slowed from 72 beats per minute to 60, then 45, then 30. Her blood pressure declined steadily, but gently. Her oxygen saturation remained normal until the very end, as if her body was systematically shutting down in the most controlled and peaceful way possible. "I can see my grandmother," were Sophia's last words. "She's telling me it's okay to come with her now." At 8:52 a.m. on October 16th, 2023, Sophia Restrepo died peacefully on the operating table, surrounded by a surgical team who had just witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about life, death, and human consciousness. In the days following Sophia's death, I became obsessed with trying to understand what had happened. I reviewed every piece of documentation, every imaging study, and every video recording from the surgery. I consulted with colleagues at major medical centers across the country, seeking any explanation for what we had witnessed. The post-mortem examination revealed findings that were just as impossible as everything else about Sophia's case. Her body showed evidence of the massive trauma she had sustained in the accident, but also showed signs of healing and regeneration that should have taken weeks or months, not hours. Most disturbing of all, the pathologist found no medical cause of death. Sophia's organs were functioning normally at the time she died. Her heart was healthy, her brain showed no signs of injury, and her blood chemistry was within normal ranges. She had simply chosen to stop living, and her body had complied with that choice. The weeks following Sophia's death were the most difficult of my medical career. I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about medicine, consciousness, and the nature of life itself. If Sophia could survive injuries that should have been immediately fatal, if her body could heal damage faster than surgeons could repair it, if she could remain conscious and coherent while technically dead by medical standards, then what did that say about all the other patients I had treated over the years? I began reviewing cases of patients who had died despite our best medical efforts, wondering if some of them had also existed in that strange space between life and death that Sophia had described. Had we missed something fundamental about consciousness and its relationship to the physical body? The questions kept me awake at night and distracted during the day. I found myself second-guessing every medical decision, wondering if there were aspects of patient care that existed beyond conventional medicine. 6 months after Sophia's death, I was consulting on a similar trauma case, a motorcycle accident victim who had sustained injuries that should have been fatal, but remained conscious and talking. As I looked at this new patient, I felt the familiar chill of recognition. Standing beside his gurney, watching him joke with the nursing staff, despite injuries that defied medical explanation, I realized that I could no longer practice emergency medicine with the certainty and confidence the field requires. How could I make life and death decisions for patients when I had witnessed something that proved those boundaries might not be as clear as medical science assumes? How could I tell families that their loved ones were beyond help when Sophia had shown me that consciousness might exist in ways we don't understand? I submitted my resignation from Riverside Memorial Medical Center 3 weeks later. In my resignation letter, I wrote that I was pursuing other opportunities, but the truth was that Sophia's case had fundamentally changed my understanding of medicine and my place within it. I now work as a general practitioner in a small coastal town, treating routine medical conditions and avoiding emergency medicine entirely. But I never stopped thinking about Sophia and what her case revealed about the mysteries of human consciousness. The case of Sophia Restrepo remains one of the most thoroughly documented examples of impossible survival and conscious death in medical literature. The video recordings from her surgery continue to be studied by researchers investigating consciousness, near-death experiences, and the relationship between mind and body. But for me, Sophia's case represents something more profound than a medical anomaly. It serves as a reminder that consciousness, life, and death might be far more complex and mysterious than our current scientific understanding can explain. Perhaps most importantly, Sophia's case taught me that there are aspects of human experience that exist beyond the reach of medical intervention, spaces where patients might have more control over their own survival than we realize, and where the boundary between life and death becomes a matter of personal choice rather than medical inevitability. The case of Sophia Restrepo will always remain the most disturbing and inexplicable experience of my medical career. It showed me that medicine, for all its advances and sophistication, still contains profound mysteries that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about consciousness, survival, and what it truly means to be alive. 8 months later, I still wake up some nights thinking about her last words. I can see my grandmother. She's telling me it's okay to come with her now. And I find myself wondering if death isn't the medical failure we've always assumed it to be, but sometimes a choice that exists beyond our understanding or control. That realization changed everything for me, and it's why I'll never practice emergency medicine again.